Hey everyone, this is Brooks Popwell from Pure Life Ministries. You're about to hear part of our bi-weekly podcast, Purity for Life. Hope you enjoy. Ed Buch is the pastor of Pure Life's residential program and a biblical counselor, and he explores why the self-life is an important enemy that we must face in order to find purity, and he also shares some ways we can fight back. Well, Pastor Ed, we're dealing with another overlooked factor in battling sexual sin, and that's the self-life. This is a term we use a lot at PLM, but maybe a lot of people haven't heard this word before. So when I think of this word self-life, to me it kind of suggests the idea of selfishness. And is being selfish what we really mean when we're talking about the self-life, or is it something more?
Well, Brooks, I would define the self-life as really just what the terms self and life suggest. It's living for self, pursuing what I want, living by my feelings, living for my pleasures, a me-first attitude. It's me at the center of everything. And I would say that that means it's something more than mere selfishness. So living for self isn't just, some character flaw or weakness like someone who has a tendency to act in a selfish manner toward others. It's a pervasive mindset and a lifestyle that we've come into and adopted. And what really defines it, honestly, is that inward flow where everything is geared to benefit me and fulfill my desires or expectations. And that inward flow is the exact opposite of the outward flow that Jesus taught us.
Another common Christian word I'm reminded about as we discuss this is the word pride. Is pride the same thing then as the self-life, perhaps?
Well, not exactly. Pride is essentially thinking highly of myself or taking pleasure in who I perceive myself to be. So pride sustains the self-life, if you can picture that. Pride feeds my self-life by keeping the focus on me, keeping my own focus on me. And it also protects my self-life. It's very much like a watchdog that guards and protects the self-life. So if anyone gets between me and my self-image or my carnal desires, they're almost certainly going to be attacked by my pride. I guess I would say it like this. Pride and selfishness are indicators that I have a strong self-life, whereas humility and being others-oriented would be indicators that someone has really learned to deny self and to nail self to the cross where it really belongs.
All right, so you've given us a couple of the overall aspects of this outward flow versus an inward flow. Can you just describe in more concrete detail the life of a typical addict? Because I know the sexual sin, obviously, and the other parts of like this inward flow, those things take a specific shape in someone's life, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Brooks. I mean, if we think just in terms of a typical sex addict for a minute, let's talk about his job, because most of them are probably employed in some measure, but the job is just a means to an end for them. They're there for the paycheck. They're really not very invested, and they probably are doing a lot of personal things on company time, maybe even looking at pornography while they're supposed to be working, that sort of thing. A lot of sex addicts are in a double lifestyle, so he may well attend church, but it's probably the bare minimum, and there's no personal devotion life behind any of that. It's just a duty, an obligation that gets performed occasionally, once a week or thereabouts. And on the family side, it really probably shows up there more than anywhere because that's the people he's supposed to be closest to, but in reality, he's become disconnected from his family and probably holds them at arm's length even with a measure of anger, maybe even unpredictable anger that keeps them from interrupting or intervening in his pursuit of his self-life. And he's probably full of excuses why he can't fulfill his responsibilities to his wife or his children in some measure, maybe even financially. And in general, I would just say it like this. He's probably maximizing his time alone so he can literally give himself over to his selfish desires.
Well, it's not a pretty picture.
No, it isn't, Brooks, but I want to say that there is hope for this person. He can truly turn around. He can really, take heed to some of the things we're talking about here today and begin to dismantle that self-life.
Okay, I think I'm understanding this whole concept a little better. Let's link it back now to our overall goal of getting victory over sexual sin. Why is dealing with this self-life so important if we want victory?
Well, the simple answer, Brooks, is that the self-life is the root system that has produced the fruit of sexual sin in a person's life. So if you want to get rid of that fruit, you really do have to deal with the root system.
That does seem to make sense. Let me take an alternative point of view for a second, though. I know there's just so many strategies and forms of treatment out there for sexual addiction, and a lot of them really don't mention anything about the self-life or anything like that. So are you really saying that it's impossible to stop committing sexual sin without addressing this issue? And if someone could theoretically quit sexual sin without dealing with the self-life, then why focus on it at all?
Well, I think it's true that for anyone who's been addicted to any form of sexual sin, including masturbation, by the way, that dealing with the self-life is essential for lasting victory. Lust is part of that inward flow I mentioned earlier. So lust is taking, it's gaining something for self. And if I'm going to overcome lust, I need to develop the outward flow. I must learn to be literally a giver instead of a taker. And as that transformation takes place, I'm literally having my self-life dismantled. And frankly, Brooks, the way to victory over sexual sin isn't to deal with the sexual sin like so many might presume. It's to deal with the root system, the self-life.
All right. Well, if someone is ready to start dealing with that, can you help us understand what are some of the basic aspects of that process, dismantling the self-life?
Sure, Brooks. It really has to always begin with a relationship with the Lord. The self-life has to be crucified ultimately, but that will never happen until I first develop a genuine relationship with the Lord. And by that I mean a relationship that's continually growing through a vibrant devotional life, through prayer, Bible study, and just communion with the Lord and seeking Him in all the spiritual disciplines that are laid out for us in Scripture. And another key part of that would be having people in our life that we've given a place, a permission, so to speak, to speak into our lives, to call us out on our un-Christ-like behaviors. And beyond that, then, we need to look to what the Bible clearly teaches. Jesus said that we are to deny self, then take up our cross and follow Him. So self-denial and self-control are the biblical mandates that we're given to deal with our self-life. What that means in practical terms is that you're literally engaging in a putting off and a putting on process, a process where you're tackling the behaviors that are springing up and flowing out of your self-life and literally putting off or divorcing yourself from those behaviors, eliminating all of those behaviors ultimately. And in fact, Brooks, Romans 8:13 comes to mind because the Bible uses a phrase in that verse about mortify or put to death the deeds of the flesh. And also in that verse makes it very clear that it's the Holy Spirit who has to play a key role in helping us do that. This isn't something we're able to do in our own strength. And so in that putting off process, the other side of it is a putting on process where we're learning and adopting the behaviors that are Christ-like, that need to take the place of our former deeds. And let me hasten to add, Brooks, that that's a lifelong process. I don't want to mislead people about that.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask you next, was realistically speaking, with the men that you counsel, you see this then playing out on, months and even sometimes for some aspects over maybe even years of their life?
Well, in some ways, yes, absolutely. I mean, I would hope that the sexual sin itself would fall off or early on in the process, but certainly when it comes to putting on Christ-like behavior, that is a tremendous undertaking that I'm still, after 14 years of victory over sexual sin, I'm still pursuing the putting on process, absolutely, and in some measure the putting off process. I have not arrived, but I know where I'm headed, and the Lord is able to get us to a place where our victories are more the pattern of our life than our failures.
Well, are there other changes that somebody can expect to begin happening in their life as they start to deal with the self-life? And if so, what are those?
Well, Brooks, the bottom line is that the person is becoming more Christ-like. So the works of the flesh are being overcome and are disappearing from his life. The fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, all of those things are becoming increasingly evident. And as a result of that transformation taking place, there is a peace with God that's unlike anything you've ever experienced before. There is actually a true oneness with the Lord developing between you and him.
Yeah, I can tell this is something you've experienced yourself, this transition, right? Give us a little more idea for you what that's meant.
Sure. That oneness that I'm trying to describe, Brooks, that actually shows up in my relationship with the Lord, in my quiet times, in my devotional time with him. They're so much more alive, and I'm connected, and I know that I'm connected. So there's something really meaningful happening that draws me in and makes me look forward to them. So I'm not engaging in some duty or some obligation or just some dry time with the Lord. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's always, peaches and cream, but there certainly are times when it's a little more like oatmeal. But by and large, there's something happening between me and the Lord, a connection that is drawing me closer to him and making it easier to engage with him. And along with all of these things, there's that indescribable joy that I've got now that comes from being in a place where my inside world and my outside world are actually the same. I'm not having to exert all my energy trying to pretend to be something I'm not or someone I'm not. I'm at rest, literally inside. I am at peace and rest. I'm no longer driven by those carnal desires that I once was. And the end result of everything I've just mentioned is an incredible feeling of freedom that I can't even begin to put into words for you. But it's real, and it's lasting, and it's wonderful.
Thanks for listening. You can find Purity for Life on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Or just go to our website, purelifeministries.org/podcast.